Hi, thanks for viewing my talk. I'm Stephen Ferrigno, and I'm currently a postdoc at Harvard University. I would like to start by thanking Robert Glushko and the Pamela Samuelson Foundation for this award and the opportunity to present to you today. My research program focuses on investigating the evolutionary, developmental, and cultural origins of the foundational cognitive capacities that allow for human thought. I've approached this broad goal with three methods. I use comparative work with non-human animals to understand the evolutionary origins of the human mind, and to investigate what cognitive capacities are unique to humans or not. I use cross-cultural work with the Chimane people, a farming foraging group in the Amazon, to understand both the universality of our cognition and how it's affected by different cultural influences. Lastly, I use developmental methods to understand when and how our cognitive abilities arise in development. I've focused on four broad case studies on aspects of our cognition that humans have remarkable abilities in. In each of these case studies, there are many open questions about the evolutionary, ontological, and cultural origins. In many of these case studies, researchers have hypothesized that these abilities are unique to humans, but it's possible that the foundations for these abilities are present in non-human animals. The first is the development of number abilities, and today I'm going to be talking about just one aspect of this program, the spontaneous representation of number. Next is the capacity to learn grammar. And although it's clear that non-human animals don't develop human-like language abilities, even in the most extreme cases of language-trained apes, like Kanzi and Koko, I'm investigating the origins of the underlying sequential processes that are needed for language and grammar, specifically the ability to represent center-embedded recursive structures. I also work on the capacity for logical reasoning and metacognition, but I won't have time to talk about these today. There are a number of ways to represent quantity. For example, if you see some cookies, you could use the number of cookies. So you could say here there are 1, 2, 3, 4 cookies, and so on until you reach the total number of cookies. Or if I just show them briefly, you could estimate the number of cookies so that you have a representation of about 9. But number isn't the only quantitative dimension. You could also estimate the quantity of the cookies by using the total amount of area the cookies take up. So you could go through the set, accumulating an area estimate of, say, 9 square inches of cookie. We wanted to test if monkeys and humans spontaneously represent the abstract concept of number and compare this to an alternative non-numeric dimension, surface area. We also wanted to measure how uniquely human factors like education and culture might affect quantity representation. So here's the task. Subjects see 2 icons and are then presented with a dot array. If they touch the correct icon, they hear a positive tone and would get rewarded with a treat for the monkeys. And through trial and error, they learn that arrays with around 20 dots or 20 square inches go with one category. Here it's on the left. And arrays with around 10 dots or 10 square inches go with a category on the right. No verbal instruction is given about the nature of these categories. And importantly, within these training trials, a number and area is always 100% correlated, such that you could use either number or area to correctly answer these training trials. We then add a small percentage of transfer trials that don't have one correct answer. If you use area, you would choose one category, and if you use number, you would choose the other category. Subjects receive positive feedback regardless of their category they choose. We tested this in US adults, Chimane adults who have limited math education and use number very infrequently in everyday life, young children who are in the process of learning formal math skills, and non-human primates who will never learn to count. Here's a video of one of the 20 adults we tested. To start, she receives some training trials and learns that the dot arrays with less, meaning either less number or area, that go with one category, and ones with more go in the other category. We then mix in some probe trials that don't have one correct choice. So here are the results. These are beta weights from a logistic regression using the number of dots and the cumulative area of the dots in predicting a subject's category choice. The orange color here is the number weight, and the green-blue is the area weight. You can see that in all groups, the number weight was significantly higher than the cumulative area weight. So both humans and non-human animals do represent a number, and they do so spontaneously. This doesn't mean that other quantitative dimensions aren't represented too, but number is one dimension that's being represented, and it's being represented more than cumulative area in this task. We also ran some controls where we were able to test for the effects of additional non-numeric quantitative variables like density, convex hull, and luminosity, and the results were the same. All groups are represented more than any of these alternative dimensions. There are also some differences between the groups, such that the strongest number effect is seen in US adults, with slightly less in the other groups. So next we want to look into what might be driving these effects. We started by looking at individual differences in US children. We found that there was a significant effect of math ability as measured by a standardized math test on the amount that they use number. So children who score higher on the math test were more likely to use number in our task. We also found a significant effect on age on the amount that number was being used. And interestingly, both of these effects remained when controlling for the other. We found a similar trend in Chmani adults, such that Chmani adults with more education had significantly higher number weights than those with less education. These results show that the human numerical perception is shared with some of our close non-human evolutionary relatives, and this ability likely evolved early in our evolutionary history. Furthermore, this shows that spontaneous number representation is not a byproduct of learning number words. This fundamental bias to extract and use number may have been an important catalyst in the emergence of our abstract and discrete counting system, because in order to represent exact numbers, you first need to segregate numerical information from other quantitative dimensions and represent it. The second case study I'm going to talk about today is grammar, and specifically the ability to represent center-embedded recursive structures. So there are a lot of definitions of recursion, but today I'm going to be talking about recursive structures, or structures that consist of a constituent that contains a constituent of the same kind. For example, the largest of these Russian nesting dolls contains smaller dolls of the same kind. You can also find these structures in language. For example, you can take a sentence like, "The cat meowed," and you can embed "the dog chased" into the center of the sentence to make "the cat, the dog chased, meowed." And theoretically, you can continue to do this forever, but practically, even with two center-embedded phrases, the sentence begins to be hard to understand. You can see that this sentence contains long-distance dependencies, such that it's the man referring to scolded, the dog to chased, and the cat to meowed. This is an example of a center-embedded sentence, but you can also have tail-embedded sentences. Today, I'm going to be focusing on center-embedded structures because they provide the best test case for the representation of recursion. So recursion and the hierarchical representations that it can produce have been implicated in the development of a number of cognitive abilities, including language, music, mathematics, theory of mind, and certain complex motor skills. The capacity to represent recursive structures has also been hypothesized to be uniquely human, or even the sole difference that separates humans from non-human animals. However, there's little comparative empirical work that supports this claim. So the questions I'm asking here are, can monkeys learn to use a center-embedded grammar? Not only can they learn it, but can they generate novel center-embedded sequences? We also want to know whether recursion comes about through language, as some have suggested. The next question we're asking is, when do children have access to center-embedded processing? And importantly, we need a task that actually taps center-embedded recursion, like this example sentence. And to do that, we use these bracket images, which each have an open bracket and then a matched closed bracket. So here's the task we use. We train subjects to touch the bracket images in a specific order on a touchscreen computer. The order was such that one set of brackets, here the orange brackets, was embedded inside the other, the purple brackets. So for this example, a subject would have to touch the purple open bracket, and then would touch the orange open bracket, and then would have to touch the orange closed bracket before touching the closed purple bracket. Once subjects reached 80% correct on the first training list, they were given one additional training list. And after subjects learned to order both these training lists correctly, we added a small percentage of these transfer trials here. So both sets of brackets in this list have only ever been presented in the center of the previously trained list. And for this transfer list, subjects receive positive feedback regardless of their response. And although there are over 250 different orders that you can respond on this transfer list, we found that there were only 3 types of responses that we saw more often than chance. Center-embedded responses, in which one of the sets of brackets is embedded inside the other, and we classified sequences as being center-embedded regardless of which specific bracket was touched on the outside or the inside of the sequence. We also saw cross responses in which the last two elements are touched in an incorrect order, and tail-embedded responses, or responses that are basically a pair and then another pair. We chose the structure of this transfer list to rule out alternative strategies. Because the items share the same positions in the previously trained lists, if subjects use an associative ordinal strategy, we should see a lot of crossing errors, or errors where the brackets are closed out of order. In contrast, if subjects correctly infer the overall structure, they should generate new instances of the center-embedded structure. So we tested monkeys, 3 and 4-year-old children, Chimani adults, and US adults on this task. Here's a video of a monkey doing the task. The first 2 trials are training trials, and then you're going to see one of the transfer trials that's occasionally mixed in. So here are the results for the transfer list. On the y-axis here is the proportion of trials. In green is the proportion of center-embedded responses. In red is the proportion of cross responses. And you can see that all human groups were really good at this task. So they had significantly more center-embedded responses than cross responses. So even the very young children transferred the center-embedded structure to this novel list. However, monkeys were equally likely to use a center-embedded and a crossed order. So center embedding wasn't the first strategy used by the monkeys, but we want to know whether they can learn to use this type of strategy. To do this, we gave monkeys some additional exposure to center embedded lists. They were trained on 2 additional training lists, and after that, we again mixed in a small number of transfer trials, which consisted of the inner brackets from each of these new training lists. What we found was that with just a small amount of additional exposure, the monkeys began using a center-embedded strategy for this transfer list. So there were significantly more center-embedded responses than cross responses. You can also see a substantial number of tail-embedded responses, which is a logical strategy, but just not the one we're testing for. And when we break down performance by subject, we see that the tail-embedded responses are coming from one specific animal who used a different strategy to complete the task than the others. However, the other 2 animals both have significantly more center-embedded responses than cross responses, and are well within the range of human children. So overall, I've shown that humans spontaneously use an abstract center embedding rule to solve this task, regardless of cultural experience. Furthermore, by the age of 3 years old, children spontaneously use a center embedding recursive strategy. I've also showed that the capacity itself is not unique to humans, as some have suggested. With some additional exposure, monkeys can learn to use a center-embedded strategy and generalize this to novel stimuli. However, only humans had a propensity to immediately extract the recursive structure from very little data. And you can stop by my poster booth to hear more about some follow-up work on the nature of these representations. So overall, my research program has begun to investigate these case studies and has already shown that many of our cognitive abilities, once thought to be uniquely human, may have a common evolutionary origin that's shared with non-human animals. However, there are also uniquely human effects that can be isolated and measured using a combination of developmental and cross-cultural methods. This combination of comparative, developmental, and cross-cultural methods is crucial in understanding the origins of the human mind and can give us insight into questions like, what makes human thinking unique? How do these abilities develop? And how do uniquely human factors like our education system affect these abilities? Lastly, I just wanted to thank my advisors, my collaborators, my committee members, and everyone in the CHAOS lab and the CARE lab for their help and feedback.